Well, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your experience and knowledge. Would you please tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
I'm Sam Kemble, and I'm a labor relations practitioner for my own firm, Workforce Delivery Inc. We provide advice to companies and employers on securing a workforce, developing a workforce, and managing a workforce, primarily on construction and industrial sites in Western Canada.
Great. So as you're aware, in 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada released its final report and 94 calls to action. The majority of these were aimed at all levels of government and those within systems to affect change at a system level within child welfare, education, health, justice, and language and culture, with the aim of redressing the legacy of Indian residential schools. There are those too that also work at advancing the process of reconciliation, and these are more granular and geared towards various levels of Canadian society. Specifically in relation to the business sector, calls to action number 92II calls on the corporate culture to ensure that Aboriginal peoples have equitable access to jobs, training, and education opportunities in the corporate sector, and that Aboriginal communities gain long-term sustainable benefits from economic development projects. Can you describe for me some of the ways in which you've implemented call to action 92II in your work?
Yes, specifically, I've never been called upon to implement 92II in the private sector. However, private sector has experience in this through a different source, and a lot of the projects that I get engaged in with are on remote areas adjacent or within Indigenous territories. So part of the project regulatory approval issued by the government is that the proponents of the project must negotiate benefits agreements with the impacted First Nations. And then those terms and conditions, those benefits agreements, incorporate access to jobs and training, and that gets pushed down to companies or employers that are engaged on the project. That's been the balance of my experience.
Fantastic, thank you. So with that experience, can you describe some of the challenges in relation to implementing calls to action, or maybe some of the barriers that you face behind closed doors?
Yes, the first and most profound challenge would be, and I guess an opportunity, depending on how you want to look at it, is securing a mandate or a commitment from the executive levels of your organization to get behind offering and making sure there's real access to opportunities on the project for Indigenous applicants. And that includes reducing barriers. So as a middle manager, if I don't have the power to make that call myself, my job as a middle manager is to make sure that the executive level of the organization understands why they need to do that, why it's important for the company, and what it's going to look like. The second major challenge is once that strategic mandate or direction is given, there's within the organization often cynics, naysayers, even sometimes racist attitudes that put barriers in place to putting in operational and tactical objectives to actually implement that strategic or motherhood statement. So yeah, the short story is absent a strategic statement, the project or this kind of initiative is not going to be successful at all. And with that strategic statement, but with no procedures developed to operationalize it, then it's also going to fail. So the task as a middle manager is to get that mandate and see it all the way through towards an implementation plan.
Thanks for that. Could you speak to why this work is important and why this work is important to you?
Well, for me, I have a connection in terms of being adopted into a First Nation community, Sandy Lake First Nation in Ontario. I'm married to a First Nation woman from Piapot First Nation. So I have a lot of personal connection and want to get behind this. But within the organization, I have to translate that want into what's in it for the company. So I guess I would add that as another objective to making things like this successful is we can have personal connections and reasons why we do this. If we're not finding and developing things in a way that make it also beneficial for the organization, we're going to run into hiccups. And on the organizational side, I'm a slave to my occupation. I love labor relations, and I hope to have 20, 30 years left. And I don't want to look back on my career and see a bunch of examples of just a fake implementation of this. And I've seen a lot of instances where these efforts have either been not pursued with the vigor that they require, or it's also just been people have given up too quickly and it's not produced meaningful results. The 92 commitment, II commitment, is about long-term jobs, and too often companies give very low-level and entry-level positions, or they train to a very task-based level. Like instead of a carpentry apprenticeship, they'll train someone to install a doorbell. Well, once you're finished installing doorbells, there's no more work. And that kind of minimalist approach is actually, in a lot of ways, does damage to the community, the economics of the community, because people get a good paycheck for a while. They might even get into car lease payments, except, for example, the project's done and they have no paycheck and no transferable skill sets. So doing it wrong isn't just not doing it. There can be harm that arises from that as well. So it's important to get it right.
I agree. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your leadership insights. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.